So if you have not heard, Kamala Harris was actually in the Middle East recently. She spoke in Dubai. She gave a speech about this war with Israel and Gaza and what the next steps are, at least coming from the Biden administration. Now, we're going to go through this speech. I'm going to chime in here and there, and then I'm going to show you how Kamala Harris is playing a lot of people. I want you to take what she says in this speech with a grain of salt, because Kamala Harris is not being completely honest about where she stands when it comes to the state of Israel. But I have some receipts to show you tonight that'll show you exactly where she really stands. I do believe that if it had not been for the mass protests that happen all across the world, I really do believe this conversation would not even be happening right now. You also have to remember, when we go into this speech, always remember again that Joe Biden has dropped significantly in the polls among Democrat voters. And remember, the majority of it recently has been over the war with Israel and Gaza. Before that, it was the economy was the number one reason. And now it's also this reason. So we have foreign policy reasons for people choosing to not support Joe Biden in 2024. Let's get into this speech here from Kamala Harris from Dubai. Here we go.
Today, I had productive meetings with the leaders of the United Arab Emirates, Jordan, and Egypt, and I spoke to the Emir of Qatar to discuss developments in Gaza and to accelerate planning for the day after the fighting. I will get to those conversations in a moment, but first, let's take a step back. On October 7th, Hamas terrorists launched a terrorist attack that killed 1,200 innocent people in Israel, including 35 Americans. It was a brutal and horrific massacre. Babies and Holocaust survivors were killed. Young people who were simply attending a concert were shot dead. 240 hostages were taken from their homes. And over then the past 8 weeks, President Biden and I have been clear: Israel has a right to defend itself, and we will remain steadfast in that conviction.
Notice how, once again, her, like many others, they start with October 7th, right? Notice how they're starting with that date, and they're not discussing what has happened prior to that date. So pay close attention to that.
We are working with Israel and our partners in the region to secure the release of all the hostages, which includes Americans. The recent pause in the fighting proved effective. More than 100 hostages were reunited with their families during this time, including 2 more Americans, and humanitarian aid surged into Gaza. As I told the families of American hostages when I met with them, we will not waver in our commitment to bring them home. Let me be also very clear, as I have said before, we cannot conflate Hamas with the Palestinian people. Hamas is a brutal terrorist organization. Hamas has vowed to repeat October 7 until Israel is annihilated. No nation could possibly live with such danger.
Now let's pause there for a second before we continue. Did you notice what she just did there? She pointed out the fact that Hamas said they will continue October 7th until Israel is annihilated. Notice that Kamala Harris is not mentioning that Netanyahu, that actually other congressmen here in the United States, the gentleman who said he wanted to make Gaza a parking lot, Lindsey Graham, also referenced towards that earlier on as well, then tried to change his tune a little bit. But notice that she's not mentioning that the state of Israel also made those same remarks in reference to Gaza. She's showing you who she serves.
Which is why we support Israel's legitimate military objectives to eliminate the threat of Hamas. President Biden and I have also been clear with the Israeli government in public and in private many times. As Israel defends itself, it matters how. The United States is unequivocal. International humanitarian law must be respected. Too many innocent Palestinians have been killed. Frankly, the scale of civilian suffering and the images and videos coming from Gaza are devastating.
Again, I want to remind you, Kamala Harris would not even be saying this right now if it wasn't for two things. One, the massive protests around the world, right, that have continued and are still going on now. Two, that includes the video footages with that as well that have come out of Gaza. And two, the fact that Joe Biden is losing, he is decreasing in the polls because of this particular issue. He was already decreasing because of the economy, but now he is decreasing even more because of this particular issue, because of the images that people have seen coming out of Gaza, the video footage, etc., the children that are being killed, right? So again, she was not saying this statement before there was international pushback from the people. So for people who continue to say that protests don't work, I want you to know they do work when you have massive numbers come out. So this time our voices could not be ignored. So make no mistake, Kamala Harris isn't saying this because she's trying to do the right thing. She is saying this because of the outcry from the American people and the international cry across the globe, and also the polling numbers of Joe Biden.
I have spoken with members of the Palestinian, Arab, and Muslim communities of America, including those who have lost loved ones in Gaza and American citizens who were injured and evacuated from Gaza. It is truly heartbreaking. As Israel pursues its military objectives in Gaza, we believe Israel must do more to protect innocent civilians. So we all want this conflict to end as soon as possible.
And what happens if they don't? Because one thing I do like about this discussion here is that there are questions. So some of the reporters did get the opportunity to ask questions to Kamala Harris. My main question would be, what happens if they don't listen to you or President Biden? What happens if they go on doing what they want to anyway? What is going to be the response from the U.S. government? Because just because Kamala Harris sits down with leaders in Israel and says, this is what I think you should do, this is what should happen, that doesn't mean that they're going to listen to you. And if they are not going to listen to you, Kamala Harris, are you and Joe Biden willing to tell Congress to withhold sending funds to the state of Israel? The $8.3 billion that you send to them every year, regardless, on top of the aid that you're sending to them to fight Hamas. Are you willing to do that? Because here's the thing. If you are not willing to hold Netanyahu accountable, I don't care what he said to you at the table, his word doesn't mean anything. That's the question I would ask Kamala Harris.
And to ensure Israel's security and ensure security for the Palestinian people, we must accelerate efforts to build an enduring peace. And that begins with planning for what happens the day after the fighting ends.
Okay, listen to this part. What happens after?
Shortly after October 7th, President Biden and I began discussions with our national security team about post-conflict Gaza. We have begun to engage partners in the region and around the world in these conversations. And this has been a key priority over the last 8 weeks. 5 principles guide our approach for post-conflict Gaza. No forcible displacement, no reoccupation.
Pause. 1 and 2, did you guys hear that? No forcible displacement, no reoccupation. So this would actually go against Netanyahu's plan to establish a greater Israel. And I've showed you that picture and that video on here before. Richie Medhurst has talked about this as well, where Netanyahu said he talked about expanding Israel into parts of Lebanon, Syria, parts of Saudi, a very small part of Saudi Arabia, part of Jordan. And actually there's like a tip of Egypt as well. So this would actually go against that plan that Netanyahu has for a greater Israel. But again, Netanyahu does not have to listen. What happens if he doesn't? So the first two, no reoccupation, excuse me. Let me make sure I go back. Sorry.
5 principles guide our approach for post-conflict Gaza. No forcible displacement, no reoccupation.
No forcible displacement, no reoccupation. Now, to that, I ask this question. What about the forcible displacement that's currently happening in the West Bank? See, that's still continuing. So there's two things happening here at the same time. There is this war that Israel has with Hamas in Gaza, but at the same time, the state of Israel, the IDF soldiers are still removing Palestinians from their homes in the West Bank. So we have two things at once. And I'll continue to throw in the West Bank as well, because I don't want people to forget that it's not just Gaza.
No siege or blockade, no reduction in territory, and no use of Gaza as a platform for terrorism. We want to see a unified Gaza and West Bank under the Palestinian Authority. And Palestinian voices and aspirations must be at the center of this work. At a certain point, the intense fighting and the phase of fighting will end, and we will begin implementing our plans for the day after. To develop these plans, then, we will continue to work with both Israelis and Palestinians. But there must also be regional consensus and support. To that end, I've had a number of in-depth conversations with Arab leaders here in Dubai. Specifically, I proposed 3 areas of focus. 1, reconstruction. The international community must dedicate significant resources to support short and long-term recovery in Gaza.
Let me comment on that really quick. So Kamala Harris is telling you that she basically wants the other Arab countries to help rebuild Gaza, right? So here's my question. If the United States government is giving $8.3 billion to Israel, why can't the United States government then in turn give $8.3 billion to Gaza? Now, I feel we should take care of our own people first, of course. But I want you to understand something. They give aid to Israel every year, regardless if there's a war, if there's this conflict or not. People in Israel have health care. Everybody there has health care. They can go to college for free. They aid a country so that they're able to have these rights and these benefits that we don't even have here in the United States in our own country. So that's something I want you to think about. Then to go to the other Arab countries and tell them, you're going to have to help us in rebuilding Gaza. But when it comes to the funding and who gave Israel funding, who gave Israel weapons to continue to fight Hamas, I don't remember Jordan giving Israel weapons to fight Hamas. Syria sure as hell didn't. Lebanon didn't, or of course, obviously, because Israel's bombing Lebanon and Syria as well. That's a whole other discussion. So I think it's really interesting that she's telling the Arab countries that they have to help chip in to rebuild Gaza when they didn't provide any aid to Israel for Netanyahu to tear Gaza apart in the first place. The U.S. government did that. So the way that I see it, Kamala, you guys agreed to give those weapons to Israel. Why are you trying to put the bill on the countries who had nothing to do with this? Think about that for a second. I know you guys didn't contribute or participate in this in any way, shape, or form, but I'm going to need you to donate some of your money to Gaza to help them rebuild. They had nothing to do with this. It's like they're being held accountable for what the U.S. government did.
For example, rebuilding hospitals and housing, restoring electricity and clean water, and ensuring that bakeries can reopen and be restocked. Second, security. The Palestinian Authority security forces must be strengthened to eventually assume security responsibilities in Gaza. Until then, there must be security arrangements that are acceptable to Israel, the people of Gaza, the Palestinian Authority, and the international partners. And to reiterate, and this is very important, terrorists will not be permitted to continue to threaten Israel. Third, governance. The Palestinian Authority must be revitalized, driven by the will of the Palestinian people, which will allow them to benefit from the rule of law and a transparent, responsive government. Eventually, this revitalized PA must have the capacity to govern Gaza as well as the West Bank. We believe progress on these three areas, reconstruction, security, and governance, will improve the lives and livelihoods of the Palestinian people.
Isn't it sad that it took 12,000 now, I think, 12,000 Palestinian civilians. It took the death of 12,000 Palestinian civilians for the U.S. government to finally acknowledge something has to change here for the Palestinian people. Do you guys understand that? Do you guys understand that if this conflict, if this war did not happen, the Palestinian people would still just be sitting there with the same issues? Israel still controlling everything. Now, she's going to go into a two-state solution here in a second, but I do want to add another thing. One thing I want to say is this. If they are to give the Palestinian people some type of self-determination, then that means that they have to control their own resources. I want to be very clear about that. That means that Israel cannot control the land, the air, and the sea. That means they can't control their electricity. That means they can't control their food. They should be able to control all of those things on their own. Otherwise, they are still occupied. Now, whether or not Netanyahu is actually going to do this, I don't know. But I also wonder if this could be the U.S. government's push to break ties with Netanyahu.
Further, we have been clear. The Palestinians have a right to dignity and self-determination, and Israelis and Palestinians must enjoy equal measures of prosperity and freedom. They also all deserve a sense of safety and security, and a two-state solution then remains the best path, we believe, toward a durable peace.
So again, she's advocating for a two-state solution, which I've told you guys before, I don't believe that that would work, particularly because of the West Bank. There are too many settlements in the West Bank at this point in time. So if we were to do a two-state solution, what happens to all those settlements in the West Bank? How are they going to redraw the lines? How is this going to work? I sincerely hope Biden administration has figured this out. And then here's another thing. We are going into 2024. Is all of this supposed to be accomplished before the November election in 2024? And if it is not accomplished before November 2024 and Joe Biden loses and Donald Trump wins, does all this go out the window?
The president and I are committed to that goal. In conclusion, when this conflict ends, Hamas cannot control Gaza, and Israel must be secure. Palestinians need a hopeful political horizon, economic opportunity, and freedom. And the region more broadly must be integrated and prosperous. And we must work toward that vision. So with that, I'll take your questions.
So here come the questions.
Madam Vice President, how did Qatar describe the state of hostage negotiations during your call today, and did they provide any reassurance of a truce in the next few days for the release of additional hostages?
So I'm not going to reveal the details of the conversation, but I did speak with the Emir, and the work and their commitment to this work is ongoing, as is ours, and our work is ongoing to support some ability to reopen the pause and to have a deal going forward where there will be a pause so that we can get hostages out and get aid in.
Thank you for doing this.
course.
You laid out your conversations with the regional leaders. You laid out the expectations that you put forward. What specifically, in terms of commitments, were you able to get from them when it comes to post-conflict planning for Gaza?
Well, let me just say that the conversations that we had were very productive. And there is, I believe, a mutual desire to figure out how we are going to approach and think about the day after.
Okay, so that reporter's question was, what commitments have you received from the other nations that she's speaking to? Notice she doesn't answer the question. She doesn't tell you what the commitments were. That makes me wonder if they even committed. This is what I was talking about. This is what Kamala Harris is saying to you in this speech. This is what her and Joe Biden want to accomplish, right? That doesn't mean that these other leaders actually committed and agreed to doing it. So I don't want people to get their hopes up. I don't want you to be Debbie Downers, but I want you to be very cautious at the same time. Notice she's not answering that question. She said, I think we mutually agree, that there needs to be some changes, but did they commit to it?
In a way that brings stability and peace to this region and reinforces, as I said earlier, Israel's security, the sense of security and safety for both the Palestinians and Israelis, doing what is necessary to ensure there are equal measures of prosperity and freedom and security for the Palestinian people and for Israel.
To that point, Israel has suggested building a buffer in Gaza, and they've been having some conversations about that today and for the past few days. What is the U.S. position on it? And one more, if I may. You mentioned, sort of bolstering the Palestinian Authority so that they can, rule both Gaza and the West Bank. What, according to you, should happen to get the Palestinian Authority to that point where they can govern both Gaza and the West Bank?
Well, as I said, we have to revitalize the Palestinian Authority, which means giving the support that is necessary for good governance, understanding that on the issues that must be resolved as we think of a plan for the day after, it is about good governance, which will bring transparency and accountability.
So notice when she's talking about the Palestinian Authority, and this is not to say that the Palestinian Authority has not had its issues. Notice she likens that to good governance, right? Like she feels like the governance of the Palestinian Authority has not been good. But at the same time, one can say that the governance, at least under the state of Israel, under Netanyahu, has also not been good. We have to remember, we have to acknowledge again, Netanyahu is in agreement with a racist apartheid state. He's in agreement with it. And that's not something Kamala Harris can deny. Netanyahu has made these statements publicly himself. Okay, the names that he's called the Palestinian people, the children of the dark versus the children of the light, all these dog whistles, and even some of the overt, rhetoric that he's had in reference to the Palestinian people. So the point is, once again, Kamala Harris she's acknowledging that there's governance issues when it comes to the Palestinian side of things, but she's not willing to acknowledge that there's governance issues under Netanyahu's right-wing racist apartheid regime. This is Kamala Harris still trying to keep herself in the good graces of organizations like AIPAC. And I'm going to get to that in a second. I'm going to show you just how far she's in deep with AIPAC.
To the people of Gaza and the West Bank. It's also about what we need to do to recognize there must be some plan for security for the region. And I suspect as a plan develops, it will take into account interim and then longer term. And finally, what we must do in terms of rebuilding.
As a plan develops. So that right there lets you know they don't have a plan. They don't have a plan even written on paper right now. They don't have a plan.
Gaza and a commitment to that.
The buffer zone, you didn't answer her question on that.
What is the question exactly?
Israel has been suggesting creating a buffer zone in Gaza, Madam Vice President. What is the U.S. view on that?
We have not weighed in on that.
Thanks, Madam Vice President. I wanted to ask, what evidence do you have that Israel won't just be receptive to the conversations and the asks the U.S. has made in terms of protecting civilian life, minimizing harm to civilian life in Gaza, not just receptive to those asks, but actually following through and really acting on them? Do you have any evidence that Israel will listen?
Okay. The question is, do you have any evidence that they'll actually listen to what you're asking them to do? Listen to what she says.
I do believe that they have listened, and I can assure you from the beginning, the president has been very direct and clear about our perspective. For example, that humanitarian laws, the rules of war, must be followed, which includes what must happen in terms of giving humanitarian aid, no intentional targeting of civilians. And we have been very clear also that, one, Israel has a right to defend itself, but we also must take into account that far too many Palestinian civilians, innocent people, have been killed, and Israel must do more.
Well,
Let me pause for a second. So she said that she believes that they have listened. If they've listened, let me tell you this. So CNN announced just yesterday that one of their producers just lost 9 family members in Gaza. 9. But according to Kamala Harris, they have listened. They're still pulling people out of their homes in the West Bank. But according to Kamala Harris, they have listened. They're still killing people now. There's still videos, still reports. By the way, so much to the point that even mainstream media has to discuss it. Even Jake Tapper had to correct Netanyahu's advisor on CNN about the casualties. But according to Kamala Harris, they have listened.
Protect innocent civilians.
to that point, in the first day after this temporary truce had ended, Israel killed 200 Palestinians, according to the Gaza Health Ministry. Is that minimizing harm to civilian life? Is that acceptable?
I don't have the details to tell you exactly who was killed, but I will say this.
Now, all of a sudden, she doesn't have the details to tell you who was killed.
We have been very clear about where we stand on this, which is innocent civilian lives should not be intentionally targeted, and that Israel must do more to protect innocent life in Gaza and innocent civilians in Gaza. And we've been very clear about that, and we continue to make that point, not only privately, but publicly as well, as you see.
So let's talk about this for a second, folks. If I drop a bomb in a vicinity where there are civilians, I can easily say I didn't intentionally mean to do it. Anyone can say that. Netanyahu can say that. His advisor is saying that. But the question is, Kamala Harris, if they do not listen to you, if Netanyahu does not listen to what you laid out, this meeting that you've had with all of these leaders, what are you going to do? What is going to be the response? So how do you respond to that question? You respond by saying, if they continue to break these laws in reference to war, we, the United States government, are not going to continue to fund them. That's what you do. You break the tie, the financial tie that you have to them. It's that simple. That's how you tell them you are being held accountable. We are no longer going to send you $8.3 billion a year. We're not sending you any more aid. That's what you do. I'm pretty sure there are Americans in this country that could use that $8.3 billion. Give some people health care in this country with that money. Think about this, folks. Now, I want to tell you something about Kamala Harris in reference to this particular issue, because you see, it's over, fam. It's over. Danny Haifong tweeted this the other day. Now, this is the U.S. Secretary of Defense. His name is Lloyd Austin. Danny said this is huge. Lloyd Austin warned today that Israel is heading towards strategic defeat. Listen to this.
This kind of a fight, the center of gravity is the civilian population. And if you drive them into the arms of the enemy, you replace a tactical victory with a strategic defeat. So I have repeatedly made clear to Israel's leaders that protecting Palestinian civilians in Gaza is both a moral responsibility and a strategic imperative. This kind of a fight, the center of gravity is the civilian population. And if you drive them into the arms of the enemy, you replace a tactical victory with a strategic defeat.
Yep.
So I have repeatedly made clear to Israel's leaders that protecting Palestinian civilians in Gaza is both a moral responsibility and a strategic imperative.
You know what this means, guys? Again, this means that through all of the death, through all the bombings, all the killings, all these civilians that have died, you know what still remains? Hamas still remains. You see, yes, they may have killed over 12,000 Palestinian people, but you have not taken out Hamas. You've killed all those people, babies, all of those children, and Hamas still exists. So strategically, Lloyd Austin is correct. Now it goes further, because you see, what you have to understand is that's why Kamala Harris is trying to word this in such a way, because she doesn't want to mess up her political career. You have to understand that Kamala Harris also supports AIPAC. And we've talked about AIPAC before on the show, how they buy politicians. These are lobbyists. I want you to see just how serious they can be. Like I told you before, they are now putting up challengers against other politicians that are not talking about the situation that they want, the way that they want it to, that are not agreeing to funding Israel. They are trying to come out after these people as well. I want you to see just how powerful lobbyists can be in DC.
Let's talk about AIPAC, the American Israel Public Affairs Committee. It was incorporated in 1963. For 10 years prior to that, it was known as the American Zionist Committee for Public Affairs. AIPAC calls itself America's pro-Israel lobby, and according to its website, it has over 3 million members across the country in regional chapters working to, quote, expand and strengthen the U.S.-Israel relationship, end quote. You may know AIPAC as being one of the biggest and most recognizable donors to many of the members of Congress in your state. But contributing to campaigns is a relatively new function of the organization. Before 2021, AIPAC did not endorse candidates nor give political contributions. Its focus was on lobbying elected officials, not actually electing officials. But in a dramatic shift in policy, AIPAC began directly funding candidates and spending big on races in 2021. AIPAC Political Action Committee, AIPAC-PAC, filed something called a Statement of Organization with the FEC just in time for the 2022 election cycle, where it spent $50 million, including both direct contributions to candidates and outside spending like TV advertisements. According to AIPAC, it donated money to 365 candidates from both parties, including every single member of both Democratic and Republican leadership in Congress. 109 Republicans who voted against the certification of the 2020 presidential election in America received campaign contributions from AIPAC. All in all, AIPAC gave money to 342 members of the 118th Congress. The 2022 elections were the most expensive midterms in American history, with a total cost of $8.9 billion spent. Now, last year,
Let's pause here for a second. Highest spending political action committees 2021, 2022. Of course, Act Blue is going to be up there, but you'll see that AIPAC was number 15 last year.
AIPAC ranked 15th in total expenditure by a political action committee, according to data collected by Open Secrets. But take a look at the other funders that AIPAC is competing against for that title. Act Blue and Win Red. They are Democratic and Republican Party machines. Save America is Donald Trump's money-raising operation. The Conservative Club for Growth, Emily's List, focuses on electing Democratic women to office. All of the PACs on this list are massively domestic-focused ideological machines. AIPAC is the only organization in the top 20 whose interests are focused entirely on America's relationship to a foreign government.
That part right there. Entirely focused on America's relationship to a foreign government. Shouldn't we be focused on strengthening America and America first? Shouldn't we be focused on the relations that we have with people in this country first? We have bridges falling apart. We have schools falling apart. We have schools that don't even have all the resources that they should have in 2023. We have housing units falling apart. I went through housing units here in Boston that are falling apart. And I said, there's no way in hell anyone should even live here. This is a hazard. We have thousands of people in this country that don't have health insurance, not covered. Why do we even have a PAC that is focused on relationships abroad? I don't even think that should be allowed. I don't care what group it was. I don't care what country it was. But this is a problem.
Now, let's take a look at who benefits from AIPAC's largesse. Here are the top 20 recipients in Congress, the House and the Senate, of AIPAC money in the 2022 midterm cycle, according to Open Secrets. They're members of both parties. They come from every corner of the country with varying levels of experience in Congress. The Democrat Glenn Ivey of Maryland tops the list. He beat out fellow Democrat Donna Edwards in Maryland's House primary after AIPAC poured millions into pro-Ivey advertisements and mailers.
Let me pause here for 1 second. I want to point out someone else. Of course, Richie Torres, which I've talked about before multiple times on this show. Notice he's one of the top recipients with over $141,000. But look who else is on this list. Shontel Brown. Remember Shontel Brown ran against Nina Turner, over $150,000 received. When you see all these people on this list, then you'll understand why they have the talking points that they have in reference to this war with Israel and Gaza. So this is an important list for people to see. I also think it's really interesting that they're talking about this on MSNBC, because I feel like had it not been from the push from the public viewers and from those of us in independent media that have been calling out the funding of these politicians, those that are in the back pocket of AIPAC, I don't think MSNBC would have ever covered this. I was shocked to see them talk about this on MSNBC.
Edwards was running for a second stint in Congress after serving during the Obama administration, where she voted present, not even a no, on a number of pro-Israel resolutions. So the money poured in against her. Not even an endorsement from Nancy Pelosi could save her. Michigan Democrat Haley Stevens unseated Democratic Representative Andy Levin. Here's what Levin had to say about that.
I'm really Jewish, but AIPAC can't stand the idea that I am the clearest, strongest Jewish voice in Congress, standing for a simple proposition that there's no way to have a secure democratic homeland for the Jewish people unless we achieve the political and human rights of the Palestinian people.
So they found a way that they had to get him out. You see how this works? So the same way that they'll pour money in is the same way to pour money in to help someone win. They'll also pour money in to help someone lose. And right now, that's what they're trying to do with other candidates that are in Congress right now. They have already, by the way, Jamal Bowman already has a primary challenger, which I predicted that before this conflict started, by the way. I told you he was the weakest of the weak of the squad members. So I predicted that that was going to happen with him. But they are pushing people to run against any candidate that has voted in such a way or spoken out in such a way in reference to this conflict that they don't approve of. And this is what they would do. We should not have political action committees. We should not have super PACs. Once upon a time, we did not have them in this country. This is why people like Ralph Nader, they were able to fight back against General Motors and they were able to win significantly because during that time, we didn't have PACs or super PACs in this country. Once the PAC money and the super PAC money start coming in, now you're not just fighting against political opponents, you're also fighting against corporations and corporate money.
AIPAC spent $4 million against Levin. He lost by 20 points. When Michigan Congresswoman Rashida Tlaib, the only Palestinian American in Congress, was censured by the House in early November over what some lawmakers called her rhetoric around the Israeli-Hamas war, 22 Democrats joined Republicans in that censure vote. 18 of those Democrats received campaign funds from AIPAC in 2022.
And of course, Richie Torres is there. There goes top ramen woman, Debbie Weiserman Schultz, Frederica Wilson. You know, what kills me are, you know, the black folk who voted against Donald Davis. You know, these are all the people, 18 of them, that voted in favor of Rashida Tlaib being censured. These are Democrats who voted in favor of it. And again, they're all funded by AIPAC. Again, how many of you in the chat are surprised to see this on MSNBC? Because I've been talking about the funding and open secrets where everybody's getting their money from for a long time. We've been talking about this in independent media. I was very shocked to see this on mainstream news.
Totaling more than $1.1 million. By the way, for these 6 of them, AIPAC was their top contributor. A growing list of progressive lawmakers who are vocal in their criticism of the government of Israel and its policies and their support for Palestinian self-determination have inspired AIPAC to spend even more. As progressive lawmakers began calling for an immediate ceasefire in Gaza, Slate reported that insiders expect AIPAC's 2024 spending to hit $100 million. In fact, United Democracy Project, which is a pro-Israel super PAC affiliated with AIPAC, is already spending money on attack ads against Democratic Representatives Jamal Bowman of New York and Summer Lee of Pennsylvania.
And I'll go ahead and pause that there because what I was trying to say for like the longest time is this is exactly why the squad members should have been on our side, listening to those who actually supported them outside of Congress and should have been out there in the streets with us when we were asking them to fight for other things like Medicare for all as well, instead of trying to cozy up to Democrat leadership, because at the end of the day, money talks, honey. And all it takes is for those organizations to kick you out. Now, Kamala Harris, I told you she's trying to play it safe. She doesn't want to end up like the people that you just saw, that gentleman, Levin, that you saw on the screen that was pushed out. But I want to remind you of a story from The Intercept back in 2018 about Kamala Harris and AIPAC. As Democrats shift left on Palestine, 2020 contender Kamala Harris gives off-the-record address to AIPAC. See, it was off the record. It was on the record in 2018. So this was the day before my birthday, March 7th. Listen to this. Kamala Harris gave an off-the-record speech at the annual conference of AIPAC on Monday. Her speech, which emphasized the need for a strong relationship between the U.S. and Israel, came amid a gradual leftward shift on Israel among some members of the Democratic Party. Democratic lawmakers are increasingly sympathetic to the plight of Palestinians. While not anti-Israel, more and more rank and file party members believe the U.S. should be more mindful of Israeli human rights violations. This part here, Harris, widely considered a 2020 presidential contender, spoke at a Monday session called A Conversation with Senator Harris, which was not listed on the conference's program or website. So you see, this was supposed to be private. Its occurrence was revealed in social media posts by conference attendees That was Avram Sparagian, a Cornell University student, and Elin Carroll, the ILIPAC co-president. In an email to The Intercept, AIPAC Director Communications Beth Robbins said she had no recording of Harris's remarks. Senator Harris spoke in an off-the-record session. It goes on to say here, Tyrone Gale, Harris's press secretary, did not provide a transcript of the senator's remarks, but said that the California senator emphasized the need for U.S.-Israel ties. Now, this was right before Kamala Harris announced that she was running for president. This was in 2018. She was already trying to get on their good side because she knew what was up. It goes on to say here, Senator Harris addressed a group of students at this year's AIPAC policy conference and participated in a student-led discussion on leadership in public service, the need for a strong U.S.-Israel partnership, and her visit to Israel last year. So what I'm trying to tell you is this. Kamala Harris is trying to walk this little tightrope in reference to this issue, and that is why she has no answer for what happens if they don't listen. She has no answer for how are you going to make sure that they carry out these plans? What have they committed to? She has no answer for it. Kamala Harris right now is trying to find a way to save herself and Joe Biden's tenure in the White House, to make sure that they will be able to be re-elected. And because of a lot of the pushback from people on the outside. But from day one, before she even ran for president, she was already kissing up to AIPAC. And notice how that meeting was off the record. Now, I'll point out this last thing about Kamala Harris, because I think this is important, because this question continues to come up. While she's continuing to say that we need a strong relationship with Israel, some people, some African Americans in this country have brought up the question, well, what are you trying to do for the relationship in reference to the African American community in this country? What are you trying to do to help Black people? So look at this, folks, and we'll end this segment with this. Kamala Harris posted this. She said, too many minority-owned small businesses have been left out of getting federal contracts. President Joe Biden and I have committed to increasing federal contracting by 50% for minority and underserved businesses, and we're on track to do that. Okay, so federal contracts, yes, it is an issue, right? But I want to show you something that I noticed about this picture. And I posted this. I think a lot of people like this tweet. 940, that's not bad for me. It got 38.1K views. Look at this. I said, look at this picture very closely. Kamala Harris discusses minority-owned businesses getting federal contracts. Not one Black person in this picture. Look at this picture, guys. Let me show you something. Look at this picture. Minority-owned businesses, right? Getting contracts, right? Not one Black person. Now, the reason why I'm pointing this out is not because I don't believe that those people should not have access to the federal contracts. I believe that they should. The reason why I'm pointing this out is to prove a point about people like Kamala Harris. She's another example of false representation. How many people said, yay, Kamala, we finally got a Black female vice president? What is she doing for Black people, though? We can't even appear in the picture about the minority-owned businesses and federal contracts. There's no Black people in this photo. You guys see this? So what I'm trying to point out to you is this. Once again, even when we talk about this issue with Israel and Gaza and the U.S. government and people like Kamala, who are fake representatives, saying things like we need to strengthen our relation with Israel, willing to do, whatever they can, bend over backwards to help out other people. They will help out anyone but us. They're so willing to even help people abroad. They'll help people in another country before they help people in this country. And then when they help people in this country, even when you narrow it down to minorities, notice you don't see us. I would not trust what Kamala Harris is saying right now. I would wait to see what happens. But I think Kamala's just trying to save her ass. That's what I think about that. Let me get to some of the comments here. Thank you for the super chat, DC. Low-key soundtrack to the struggle equals a masterpiece. Yeah, Low-key is also a rapper. Teresa says, yeah, they're afraid. They're only thinking of themselves. I agree. Timbo, great point, Sabby. Without that money, they cannot wage war. Right. It's just a simple thing. You don't want to listen to what we're telling you to do? Okay, we're not going to fund you anymore. Easy. Thank you for the super chat. Ooh-wee. YT Really Graceful said that an Israeli company contacted her to push pro-Israel views on her YouTube. They're offering thousands to influencers. I heard about that. Thank you, Sparky. With near 100% support of U.S. Congress, plus Elon's full-throated fellatio, Bibi feels empowered enough where it doesn't matter what about the Biden administration says anymore. The Oracle says this whole approach is weeks and thousands of lives late. Landrew, I am so proud of young people standing up and being counted. And thank you for the super chat, Mistress. Love you, Sabby. That $14 billion could forgive loan debt. And as an Arab American, I am disgusted.